What is up, guys? Fire here. I mean, you already know that. I'm like a famous rapper. Anyways, this video is all about classes. Now, classes are the fundamentals of programming. Classes, or a class, is a blueprint for creating objects. If you try to learn object-oriented programming or whatever, you probably heard that before. What does that mean? That means that we model the behavior that we want in the class, and then we use the class to represent that behavior. For example, because we are doing game development or learning C++ for game development, let's imagine that we're going to have a player in our game. Now let's imagine that that player is going to have an int power, health for the float, or actually float for called health, and I don't know, maybe an integer mana, so on and so forth. Notice if we put all that in main, but even though we're not going to have main in Unreal Engine, so don't worry about that, but notice if we have to put everything here in the main. I mean, we only have 3 variables at the moment, but think of it like this. Let's say we have 5 players. How can we distribute this on those 5 players? Well, that is where classes come into place. So what I can do here is I can create a class called player like this. And what I can do is I can put everything inside of the player over here. So I can put all these variables inside. And what did I do? Let me just go over here, back, and copy this and paste it over here in the player. So now I can use these variables from our player class, but I will need to make them public. And in order to make them public, simply here I'm going to type public colon, and everything that's typed below this public will be counted as a public variable. What does that mean? That means that we will be able to access these public variables here in the main. If we set them to be private, like this, if we set them to be private, for example, we will not be able to access them. So if I go here and I don't know, let's say int, so we have power, health, mana, what else do we have? So let's say magic like this. So if I set the int private magic or magic to be private, we will not be able to access it. We will see that in a moment. So how can we create an instance out of this class to use all of these variables? Well, here I can simply come and I can say player, I don't know, let's say wizard, like this, and we created the player wizard. We can also do something like this. We can say player like this, and voila, with open close parentheses, because this is called a constructor. Don't worry about this. In a moment we will talk about constructors and all of the good stuff. This is just a warm-up introduction what is happening over here. So first of all, let's cover this public and private that I mentioned a moment ago. So here we have the int power, which is public. What does that mean? That means that I can do this. I can say wizard. So I can say wizard.power is equal to 100, and I can go here and say cout. The power value is power level is over 9,000. And here I can say like this, and I can call wizard. So I can call my wizard.power, and here again I'm going to say end-l to end the line. If I run this, notice what is going to be printed in the console. You see here the value, or the power value, is 100. Why? Well, because we set it over here to be 100. And as I said, it's a public variable, which means we can access it over here inside of the main. What if I try to use magic? Can I use magic? Can I say wizard.magic? No, I cannot. You see here, and even if I say 3 like this, you will notice, pay attention here, it will say member player magic decline at line 9, not line, 9. Line 19 is a private variable. See, it's inaccessible, meaning it's a private one. We cannot access it here. Instead, we need to create a function that will be able to access this variable. But don't worry about that. I just wanted to cover what is a private, what is a public variable. Now, you will not create classes like this in Unreal Engine and also in C++ because, well, I need to delete this now over here. How we are going to do that is that we're going to go here on this learning C++ for Unreal Engine. I'm going to right click and I'm going to go here under add, and then here I'm going to say class. So this is how we're going to do it. And this right here, as I already said, what I did a moment ago was just an introduction to it. So I'm going to right click on it, and this is the proper way that we're going to create our classes in Unreal Engine and in C++ from now on. So we're going to right click, go add, and click here class, and this is the class name. So here I'm going to say player. And notice here, it automatically created, you see here, we have a player.h and player.cpp. We will see what they are. When I click OK, we have here player H and player CPP. What is going on, teacher? What are you doing? You're trying to confuse me, teacher. What is this over here? You're trying to kill me. Don't worry, I am not. I'm not, okay? First of all, now this is a class in C++. I mean, what we created a moment ago was also a class, but here you see this .h file. You see here we have this public. We can also have here private, so we can say here private like this. What this .h file is, this is where we are going to declare the variables and functions that we are going to use. And this is where we are going to implement them in our .cpp. And .cpp is simply .c++ file. And this is the one where we are going to implement everything, and this is where we are going to have our variables. So for example, now here we can have our int power like this. So power with capital P. Here we can have our int mana as well. And here we can have our float health like this. And now inside of our player CPP is where we can implement these values. This right here, player, is a constructor. What is a constructor? A constructor allows us to create an object or a copy or an instance from this class. This is what everybody mean when they say a class is a blueprint for creating objects. This means here it is implemented by default when we created a class. You see here player, open close parentheses, and colon or semicolon, and this is how we are going to implement it over here. So for example, now inside of the constructor, because when we create an object over here, the constructor is the one who is going to be called. And in order to use this class now here inside of this learning C++ for Unreal Language.cpp, here at the top we need to say include, and here I need to type my player.h file. If I don't type this out, we will not be able to use the player. So now in our int main, I can say something like player, and now I can say here wizard, let's say wizard like this. And if I say it is equal to player like this, pay attention, player, this is that constructor. This will construct an object called wizard type of player. But pay attention over here. You see, we're calling this player constructor, which is this bad boy over here. And notice we have open close curly brackets for him, which means we can add implementation here by default. And let me show you what I mean. So we have our variables power, mana, and health. If I were to go now over here, and if I say cout, and I say mana colon, and here I call our wizard dot mana, and here I'm going to say and L, and let me just copy this 3 times, so, or actually 2 times, so we're going to have mana, or actually power, and here I'm going to say power, and mana, and health, and here we're going to have health, and here we are going to have health. So if I were to run this and print it in the console, so run yes, we will see here that we have the default values, which are some crazy numbers that we don't want. If we want to initialize these, we can do it right here inside of the constructor. So I can say something like health is equal to, for example, 100. I can say power is equal to, so I can say power is now equal to, I don't know, let's say 55. I can say mana is equal to 32. And if I go now and run this, so yes, and run it, pay attention what's going to be printed here. Power 55, mana 32, health is 100. Why? Well, because we initialize that inside of the constructor over here, you see, inside of the constructor, and we call that constructor to construct an object or an instance of that class. And of course, I can go here as well and manipulate these variables. I can say wizard.power is now equal to 88. And notice here in the constructor, I set the power to 55, but here I'm changing it back to 88. And if I run this and debug it or open our console, we will see now that the power is 88, which is exactly how we are going to manipulate our variables. Instead of putting them here in main or wherever, we put them or group them all inside of a class like this. Now we can also have private variables. So here, let's say I have my mana set to private. So here I'm going to create mana to private, which will mean here I can edit it within the class inside of itself, but I cannot use it now over here. You see, now we have an issue because it is not accessible. Instead, what we can do is we can create here a private getter. I can say here int, and I can say get mana like this, and I can return it. So I can simply say here return this, and with a slash like this, and less than or greater than sign, and I can point to mana. So this is referring to this class, which means this class is mana variable. So now, because this is a private variable, which means here we cannot access it, but as I said, we can create here a public function to return this, but actually here I'm not going to return it like this. Instead of here, I'm simply going to do this. So here we are going to declare it, but inside of our player CPP, this is where we are going to implement it. Remember, I said that here in the .h file, we declare variables and functions that we are going to use, but in the CPP file is where we are going to implement them. So simply here, I can right click on our mana and quick actions and refactors, and I can say here, create definition of get mana in CPP. But before I do that, notice here this green line here. It is complaining that we don't have the definition for the function right over here. So what I need to do is we can either do it like this. So we can right click on it, click here quick actions and refactorings, and click here create definition of get mana inside of our player CPP, which we go over here. Notice now we have the int, and this is how we declare a function or implement it. So we say int, which is a function that returns an integer, and then we call the name of the class colon, and then we say here get mana, you see? And here we are going to return this referring to the class itself, and here I'm going to say slash and greater than sign mana. So this is how we are going to return now or access our mana, which is private. So if I go back now over here, and instead of calling wizard dot like this, I'm going to say wizard dot get mana, and this is going to return that mana from the wizard class. And if I go back here in our player, we are setting mana to be equal to 32, which means if I run this now, we will see that 32 will be printed in the console, as you see right here. So this is how we access private variables. We create functions that allow us to access them. And how can we change the value of it? Well, we can change the value like this. So here I'm going to create a void public function set mana, which will take an integer, and I'm going to say, I don't know, underscore mana like this so that we can differentiate it. So voila, we do need to implement this, and how we can do it, we can either go over here and right below the getter, we can say void player colon set mana, which takes an integer underscore mana as a parameter like this. And then simply what we can say is here, we can say this referring to our mana is equal to underscore mana to set that value. So now when we call this function and pass a value to it, we will be able to set it back. So if I go back over here, inside of our constructor, you see we set the mana to be equal to 32. But if I go back here, after we create our player wizard, and below here, if I say wizard.set mana, and if I say, I don't know, first of all, I'm going to do it like this, which will be a better example. So here below, I'm going to call the wizard set mana, let's say, I don't know, 11, for example, and I'm going to call to print our mana again over here. But I'm also going to say here, cout, like this, changed mana value, and then here I'm going to say end L, like this, to end the line. So if I run this and go here, yes, we will see now, pay attention, mana is 32, but here change mana value, mana now has a value of 11. So this is how we can change or access private variables within the function. Why do we need to set private and public? Well, that is the rule in programming. Simply put, it's a rule that all of your variables should be set to private except if you need them to be public in some situations. So most of these variables, you will have situations where you will set your variables to be public. Don't worry about that. We will have it. But as a general rule, so when you sit in your car, a general rule is to put a seatbelt on, even though not every single person is doing that. And I'm not encouraging you to don't put the seatbelt on. Don't be like, honey, that guy from the internet told me not to put the seatbelt on. Give me my knife. I'm going to cut that thing out of my car. No. So as I already said, these variables are going to be set to be private most of the time. So that's why I needed to cover this public and private. And as I said, that's rule in programming, because when you keep them private, they are only accessible within the class itself. Then we need to create these functions, public functions for getters and setters, in order to access these variables as we just did over here. And this is how we are accessing them. So actually, this is how we are returning this value, accessing to read its value, and this is how we are setting that value. And of course, we can here declare as many functions as we want. I mean, going outside of the getters and setters, because we have a player class here, we can have void attack, which is, well, not an attribute, but something that the player can do. He can also have here void walk. And this is how we build that behavior, or how we create the behavior for our characters, in this case, for our characters in our game with classes. And of course, we need to implement this. So you can either go and do it manually on your own by typing void and then player : and then the name of the function, or you can simply go over here. Where did I declare these? So it's actually over here. Right click, quick actions, create what's called the definition. I forgot the name, so blocked over there. So yeah, create the definition for attack and walk. And if I go back here, now we have the attack, now we have the walk. And here you can add the functionality to denote that the player is walking. Here you can also add the functionality to denote that the player is actually attacking, and here the player is walking. So if I go back here, and if I include the iStream and this over here. So let me include it here. And should I include the namespace as well? Using namespace, yeah, I mean. So here I can do now something like cout : the player is walking, like this, actually attacking. And here I can end the line, and it's not walking, but attacking. And here below I can do the same thing, but denote the player is walking. Which means that when we go back here, and if I remove all of this, and we have our wizard player, we are not going to change anything here. Simply I'm going to say wizard.attack like this, and wizard.walk like this. What do you think will happen when we run this? So if I run this, and if I say yes, we will see here that it is printed, player is attacking, player is walking, as you see right here. So we group now everything that we learned about variables, functions as well, makes sense, because you see now we group everything inside of classes. That's why I went step by step, explaining everything what we did, step by step, line by line, and slowly progressing up to this point where we wanted to explain all of this right here. And of course, you can create multiple instances, because a class is a blueprint for creating objects. Here we have the wizard player, but we can also have a knight player. So I can say here player, and I can say knight is equal to player like this, not payer, it's player like this. What does this mean? This means we now have two variables of type of player. One is wizard, another is knight, and I can do something like this, and they're totally independent of one another. I can say it's wizard, so I can say wizard.health is equal to 101, and I can say knight.health is equal to 11, and if I use here cout, and if I say wizard health like this, and I call here wizard.health and end this with end line. And let me just go over here as well and copy this and paste it below, because we're going to have wizard and we're going to have the knight health, and here I'm going to call the knight. So knight, and in between then I'm going to print the line. So cout, not count. So here we're going to say end L like this with lowercase e. what do you think will be printed? Well, if I go over here and if I say yes to run this, we will see now that the wizard health is 101 and the knight health is 11. They are totally independent of each other, which means we can create as many copies of our player class as we want. So we can create millions, and this is how you will create or define your character in your game. So if you have a class that is going to define your character in Unreal Engine, you will define it like main player, blah blah blah, give it its attributes, give it its values or whatever you want to give it, like health, power, mana, I don't know, skill set, whatnot, functions to move, attack, so on and so forth, and then we will be able to create multiple players from that same function. Now, before I leave you in this video, I'm also going to talk about one more concept, and that is we can create a constructor with arguments, same as we can create or actually have a function with arguments. So this is a no argument constructor, which means when we call him, we simply call him like this: player, open, close, parentheses, colon, or semicolon. We don't do anything here. But we can also create another constructor. We can have as many constructors as we want. So here I can go and I can create, for example, player, and let's say here he will take an integer health. So it's health like this, and also he will take a float. Actually, it's a float for health, and integer is power. So underscore power, and float will be underscore health like this. And I can simply, well, semicolon, end the definition. This is only defining it, but now I need to implement it. So I can right click over here, quick actions and refactoring, create definition, and now I have created the definition for the player. So now he is over here. And what I can do is I can say within the constructor now, I can say this, and referring to the health is now equal to underscore health, which is this parameter that we are passing here. And they are also called parameters or arguments, same as within a function, but only it's in a constructor, which means that we can access it like this to give initial values. So here I can also say this dot power is equal to underscore power like this. So now instead of going over here, we can still call the constructor with no arguments, because here he is, we can call him. But we can also do this. So here we have the player, we can set the power, I don't know, 54, and we can set the health, I don't know, 89. And this will work as well. So I can go now see out, and I can say health colon like this, and I can call the wizard.health, and here I can end the line. And let me just copy this and paste it. So see like this, and instead of health, I'm going to say power. Power, and here I'm going to call the wizard power. And if I go here and run this, we will see 54 and 89 being printed in the console. So we have the health 89, we have the power 54, as you see over here. We don't have the default ones that we set here for the health 100 and power 55. Instead we have, why am I obsessed with these numbers, 54 and let's say 12. So yeah, so here we set it to be 55, but here we set it to be 12, which means this will override it. Basically, it will not override, it will call this constructor. It will not call this constructor at all. So it will call this constructor over here using the variables that we pass here as arguments to set to the power and to the health. So they will have that value as you see already here. And we printed this and we saw it a moment ago. So this is how we can use classes or what are classes and how we can use them to basically model the behavior in our program or in our games. In this case, we model the behavior of the player, but you can use this to model the behavior of pickable items or collectible items, of enemies, of projectiles, whatever. But this is how you do it. You declare a class or you create a class. In .h file is all the implementation. So here we declare the variables, or actually, excuse me, the implementation is here in CPP. But here in the .h is where we declare the variables that we want to use, such as our integers, floats, booleans, strings, whatever. And this is where we implement them to give them values and whatnot, and then we can create objects or instances out of that class here and use them in our game or in our app. So Fahir here from MasterDudes.com. If something is unclear, please ask in the comment section below, and I will see you guys in the next video.